Let's talk about inflation. I love inflation. You know, the accelerated depreciation of all your assets, it's inflation. No one really trades against it. What are you talking to your clients about inflation? What's your expectations on it? How do you think, both here in Australia and offshore, how's that going to affect both your clients?
Yeah.
I'll start with you.
I'll go first. I'll go firstly. So we talk about inflation a lot. And the reason we do is because many clients go, Craig, I've got a self-managed fund, why don't I just put it all in term deposits? Yep. You know, we do get that question. And because it's been a while since we've had high inflation in Australia, some people are forgetting about that. Mm-hmm. So we start talking about just how, inflation really does erode the value of people's portfolio. And even if you are retired and you're 65 years old, it's extremely important to have growth assets to combat inflation. So I guess we come around to talk about inflation by introducing the concept of growth assets.
So that's equities, that's that sort of stuff that you...
Property, equities, well, exactly right.
Yeah, property linked to inflation, I guess. So if you buy a REIT, you think that rental stream is linked to inflation, so therefore it's an inflation buffer.
Exactly right.
What about your guys?
Look, I think my expectations for inflation is that we're less likely to see higher rates of inflation than we are to see lower rates of inflation. I think we're in a situation right now where central bankers around the world are trying to create inflation, and consistently month after month after month we're just not seeing it. And I guess how much money do you have to throw at it until you get it? I guess there's some talk in the US that there may be less money being thrown at it. So I actually think we're more likely to see a very low inflation environment going forward than a high inflation environment. Problems in Europe, China could, we've got potentially deflationary environment in China now. So I think we're at the very thin end of the wedge of this being in the news and talked about.
Are you talking about globally? Like in terms of Australia, what do you think?
Okay, very different. So in terms of Australia, look, we might get a little bit of a bump here, obviously with the pullback in the currency, which is going to be more inflationary locally than deflationary. But I think that'll be more than outweighed by the bearish global picture, I think, going forward for at least the next 12, 18 months.
I mean, I had Chris Joy on the show a few weeks ago, and he was making the point that currency buffer that we had, where we had a very strong currency, could go and buy flat screens, all the electronics, whatever we were buying with the high currency. Now that goes to a low currency, he is of the view that internal inflation is well over 3%. So whether it be your insurances, your water bills, all those sort of things are well over 3%. And this was a real drag to that number. The currency being down where it is, I'm not sure that I'm going to agree with you in respect of, we sit at 2.5 now, which is high by international standards. If we start to broach 3% because of our currency, I'm not quite sure that their weakness will be able to stymie that. I don't know that that's going to happen yet. I'm not 100% certain.
Yeah. It's just time. I mean, just how long the external deflationary environment lasts compared to the internal inflationary environment.
Yeah, I just think we import a lot of it. The numbers have to come through. And we are going to sit at 2.5. I don't think we're going to go under 2. Yeah. We'll be trying to stay between the band. Yeah. My only concern is if we go outside the band, what they'll do is try and lift rates, which would just be catastrophic. They just can't do that. Yeah. So what do? So where do you see cash rates? What in the medium term? Let's say this financial year, 2014.
Well, I think if you look at the short-term, long-term term deposits, it looks fairly obvious perhaps that cash rates are going to fall.
Yep.
But the question is, as we've been talking tonight, when do they start rising again? And that's my crystal ball's not working on that one.
What about you? Where do you see cash rates for your customers?
Look, steady to lower depending on how bad the rest of the world gets. So I'm a bit of a rest of the world bear at the moment, mainly
except for the US,
Europe and Asia. I don't think the US is as strong as you think.
Oh, I thought you were saying it was really strong. So I was
no. Some of the housing data's been great, but anything outside of housing and cars, really up until a couple of months ago, has been still pretty tepid. Unemployment growth is still pretty tepid. So. Look, I'm a little bit bearish on the global situation in terms of rates. Therefore, I think Glenn Stevens has done a good job at keeping enough of his powder dry to still give him a tool there. It won't be the blunt instrument that the Fed has had. I think he can drop rates and try to get things going. But at the end of the day, we're a price taker, aren't we, in Australia? So it doesn't really matter what happens externally.
Yeah, and I think we probably have another cut in us this calendar year. It's just a question of, the problem for the Fed, for our Fed, for our RBA, has been that their traditional tools haven't worked. They've dropped rates over the last 3 years, and the currency stayed really high.
Yeah.
So they dropped them one last time, and the currency dropped them.
We need some quantitative easing.
Yeah, that's sort of work.
We need Glenn Stevens in a helicopter
to drop in. And if the tools don't traditionally work, I think when Stephen says, I might drop it to 2.5, I don't know how Stevens' problem, I believe, is, and you would say it, the consumer haven't responded.
It loses its impact. Quarter of a basis point, you get to a point where it's not going to cut it.
Yeah.
And that's why I think he's done a good job to keep that much up his sleeve. So he could, if he needed to, if Europe fell over again, he could go 1% if he needed to.
But do you not feel that the consumer themselves are much more conservative? So they're not reacting in the way they traditionally had reacted. That's the problem.
Definitely.
Don't you think that's the truth?
Definitely. They've stopped spending. I think they're concerned due to the world that we live in now. They're trying to get their head around.
Yeah.
You know, should I buy? You know, should I upgrade my home? Should I buy assets, or should I just sit in a corner and sit by for a while?
Yeah,
you know,
I think economics is such a big part of the dinner table conversation these days, and it probably wasn't, 5 or 10 years ago.
Yeah, and I think when you look at the numbers around the home growth, they've really exploded. Where people have just been paying off their mortgages. They've been these very conservative banker type people. They've been repairing their own balance sheet, and the Fed. Our Reserve, is saying, hang on a second, I'm going to give you free money. You're not doing it.